attendee.
Excellent.
Nice. Hi, everyone. Some more folks jumping in, maybe give people a few minutes or a minute, one more minute. Let's see, pull up my notes here. Gwyneth, are you hanging in there on your session adventures?
It was a little bit of a slow start this morning. It's I'm starting to feel my age a little bit. Running around the Capitol for 12 straight hours poops me out now.
Walking up those stairs and walking the hallways will do it.
I swear, I'm trying to wear comfortable shoes, but I'm showing up in Nikes next week. I'm like,
Why
You
not?
should totally do that. I
should.
wear my, very comfortable, non-cool shoes because it's just easier.
Yeah, being good at journalism often means giving up your cool.
Especially around fashion, I would imagine. Yes.
Gwyneth, I just don't ever see that happening with you. I'm sorry.
Are you kidding? I'm already wearing my mom's pearls.
When they did the Spotlight movie, there was this, the people who were doing the outfits were like, okay, think of people who are usually about 10 years, behind the trends. And that's how you should dress these folks. And all the folks, because I know some of the folks, because from the Boston Globe, and we all kind of went, yeah, that's kind of right.
I
Maybe
had my
20 years.
haircut this week, and my stylist, who I have known for 30 years, was like, "Girl, you've had this haircut for 30 years." And I was like, "What?"
It works, hey?
So he
Right.
persuaded me to change it up a little bit and give me some little like face framing and to kind of do a little something different here. I don't know. We'll see. I think it's going to work.
Well, hey guys, so I think we should get started. We have 9 folks who've joined us. Thanks everyone for coming. Why don't we, so today, anyone, some folks have been coming every week to these chats. I think we might have a few new people. I'm Marjorie Childress. I'm the managing editor at New Mexico in Depth. Trip Jennings, our executive director, is here. Thanks for joining. And we are joined by Gwyneth Doland today. And Gwyneth, maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us about your new gig.
Yeah, so I thank you, Marjorie and Trip. It is always a pleasure to be with you guys. I am professor of practice at UNM now. I've been teaching part-time for 13 years, and I just became full-time, which is great. I love it. And, being professor of practice means that my mandate is to connect our journalism students with the industry and better the journalism ecosystem for all of us. So to that end, this semester, I've got 14 students coming up with me to the Roundhouse every Wednesday. And it has been really interesting and cool to see it through their eyes. It's massively confusing, really hard to figure anything out for, beginners. And that's a good reminder for me of how impenetrable it still is, even after the webcasting and there's, clickable links in the agendas now and all of this stuff. It's still hard to figure out for regular people.
Well, let's start there because we want to talk a little bit about what we sometimes call the good government umbrella of work. To, in many ways, a big part of that is making the State House more transparent and accessible. There have been a lot of strides over the last 14 years that the three of us have noticed and have actually been part of. I think actually helping to push, webcasting being probably at the top of my list. What's at the top of y'all's list and kind of the strides that have been made around transparency?
Well, I think people have been talking to me this week. The Democrats have been bragging about transparency in the budget process, for example, and even Jason Harper, ranking member, I guess, on House Tax and Rev Committee. He's a Republican of Rio Rancho. I talked to him yesterday for New Mexico in Focus, which airs tomorrow at 7. And Jason told me that he was proud that most of the tax bills, for example, that are going to be in the tax package that usually just sort of pushes up from the dirt like a crocus at this time of year with no warning, that most of the bills in the tax package have been through the committee. So have had a hearing, have seen the light of day, have had some public input. And similar efforts on the budget. So I think they're trying in some ways.
You know, that I want to flag two things, which is I think, and this gets in the weeds, but if you follow bills now, you will see red lines and, you know, blue ink in bills, and it's called amendments in context, which is coming out of a committee. You will see what a committee or even a chamber on the House floor, Senate floor will have changed or added to a bill based on debates. And that sounds kind of like arcane, but it's really important for the public to be able to track where changes are made in bills. And they just recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, started adopting this procedure, which is done in other states. I think that's a real highlight on their transparency. And one I will say is that they have become, in the last 4 or 5 years, much more transparent about where dollars are coming from around money to pay for brick and mortar projects around the state. Capital, that's what we call capital outlay.
Yeah.
So they are making strides. I think there's a lot of way to go. You know, as journalists, we always want to push. We think the public has a really important role in its oversight of public officials. This is just something built into the system. And so they are making inroads, but I think as we are seeing with more legislation, there's still some way to go.
Yeah, I think that those amendments in context that they're doing now are so helpful when you're just tracking a bill. Let's say you're a member of the public and there's one bill that you really feel is important to you. That has made it so much easier to follow along with lawmakers as a bill winds its way through a committee. You know, they actually show the changes that they make, and it's all right there on the website. So yeah, I agree. That's been a hugely impactful transparency measure. And I noticed in a bill that George Munoz has, he actually has a bill, and I mean, we could get into the budget making
So
process.
tell people who George Munoz is, just in case they maybe don't
Yeah,
know.
well, he's the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, which is a highly influential committee for putting together the state budget. So what happens is the state budget starts, it gets passed by the House. The House puts it together, then it goes over to the Senate. And really his committee takes what the House sends over and it makes amendments to it and adjusts it. And then it comes back to the Senate floor and they vote on it. Usually it's different than what the House sent over a little bit,
Yeah.
sometimes a lot. And then they have to get together and agree on it. But his committee is super influential. And, I've talked to several people this week actually who what they want didn't make the cut in the House budget. And so now they're saying, along the lines of, we're just holding out hope for the Senate. So it's now in the Senate's court, so to speak, and his committee, he has a lot of power because he's the chair of that committee. And it's just a really important committee for the budget. He actually has a bill this session that has a laundry list of appropriations in it. It's a bill that he filed under his name. In some ways, to me, that's kind of being transparent. I mean, that he's filing a bill with all these changes he wants to see. And at the bottom of that bill, which I thought was really interesting, it kind of surprised me when I saw it. There's a provision that says that the Legislative Council Service shall publish on the legislative website a searchable list of the appropriations contained in the budget after it passes, the name of each legislator who allocated a portion of the appropriation and the amount of the verified allocation. So that would be like this huge change in the transparency of how the budget is put together each year. the billion, many billions of dollars that go into the state budget.
We should tell people who are here that if they have questions for us, they can use the question and answer function for us if they have questions about this, because this can be really arcane, to people who don't know the process. So,
Marjorie, I want to say, when we first came on, we were talking about, how transparency and openness at the legislature has changed over the years. And I was remembering back in 2008 or 9 when I was bringing my little webcam up there after Janice Arnold Jones had started webcasting some stuff. And I said, well, we should do that too. And how angry people were, right? How angry some lawmakers were, a lot of them gone now, that we would try to invade this space and broadcast it out to the public. And I know part of that was feeling that it was a little rude, and that's a big deal at the Capitol, but it was more of this fear of, well, what happens if we invite all these other people in here? And now it's like, wow, that I think that some people who've been there a while, or been in the ecosystem for a while, have seen that change, and in the end it's probably been for the better for everyone. And so now they're taking more little steps to do it, because the world didn't end with webcasting or remote participation or all this other stuff.
Yeah.
I want to say this. Everything that we have talked about are strides that are being made, that have been made in the last, actually, Marjorie, it may be 15 years because it's 2024. So I remember the push was in 2009, right? It may have been 15. It's hard to remember.
We were up there and we were pushing, we were doing our own webcasting, and then I actually think that big push, I was really fear-based. There was a lot of dissension around that.
Yeah.
I really think that former Governor Susana Martinez started doing her own webcasting and archiving it on her website.
Yeah.
That's when I think Democrats who control the state legislature said, okay, we're just going to do it. Because one of their arguments was, she could just be culling these videos and cutting and pasting, and not that she was, but she was saying she was just doing the raw video, but they wanted to control what the public saw. And that's really, I think, when it finally happened.
So we are talking about strides. I do want to say that there have been, in my opinion, after being up there, many years, there have been a couple of maybe steps backward. And what I mean by that is that once upon a time, journalists could walk the hallways around the House and the Senate chamber. They could actually wait in the hallways to talk to state lawmakers. They've really tightened that up. You're not supposed to do that anymore. And that is something that I've conveyed to, people at the Roundhouse. But I think we should always talk about that too. They've made some strides, but there's also, as always, there's this back and forth that happens.
They've also been really resistant, and really resistant to more transparency for lobbyists. It's, this is something that a very small set of lobbyists lawmakers have plugged away at over the years, and it rarely gets any traction. But this effort to require lobbyists to disclose what bills they're lobbying on, how much they make from their employers, so we know the true value of money, how much money is being pumped into sway policymaking. There's just, it's been a real slog. And for the newcomers, Gwyneth, I don't even know how your students would even begin to understand who the lobbyists are or what they're working on up there and why it even matters.
I love it that you just asked me that, because yesterday I had my students up there, and the House was passing the budget, so they couldn't find anyone they were looking for.
Yeah, right.
There were no lawmakers to be found. They couldn't come off the floor. We couldn't even catch them on the way to the bathroom, which is one of my secret ambush spots. But I said, well, here's what we're going to do. And I saw a Trip while we went off to do this. I said, we're going to see what we see up here in the building. And I taught them one of our tricks, which is we're going to walk around this third floor circle for an hour.
That's exactly right.
And everyone else, it was all lobbyists up there, right? And I was like, what's your story? What's yours? And yours? And then it's like oil and gas. Oh, all right, let's pause here for a moment and talk to this person. And we talked to 3 or 4 lobbyists who took lots of time and patience to talk to my students. And I taught them some really valuable lessons about off the record. And so one of my students, after one of them walked away and she said, "Why are we talking to people off the record?" And I said, "Oh, well, did you just learn a whole lot about the background of your bill?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, that's just to move you forward, right? So that the next person you talk to, you have better questions. And you have to keep talking to all these different people as you build an idea of what's going on." So I think for us, lobbyists are some of the most valuable people in the building, right?
Amen. Yes.
I mean, I was in
Yes.
the elevator yesterday with former Senate President Richard Romero. And I was like, here's the guy who's been involved for so long, knows so much about how the place works, how legislation moves, that just like in Congress, sometimes the lobbyists are the most powerful people in the building because they know more about how the place works than a lot of the newcomers who are there. So, like Tripp always says, there's a give and take here, So sometimes lobbyists are standing there with their shirt on that proclaims what they're there for. And sometimes they're like, I don't talk about that because my clients don't want me on the record. So I'm not going to say anything, but here's what I am going to tell you. Right. And then you end up with some good stuff. So I think they are, and remember that a lot of these lobbyists we're talking about are lobbying for groups and things that people in our audience right now are really supportive of, right? So they're nonprofits, they are, working on behalf of causes that people really care about, good government stuff. I see Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and open elections. They were up there last week, I guess, tabling, and you know, um, it's a
No,
complicated.
undoubtedly, lobbyists are really important to the law-making process, and they've been part of our system from the very beginning. I mean, from the very beginning, they've been.
Of the country. This
Yeah,
is
I
just
mean,
not just
lobbying, I mean, at the
Michigan.
end of the day, it's, I mean, I think we should actually make a distinction if we want to go really deep here. At the end of the day, it's about the ability of people to communicate with their elected officials. A lobbyist under the definitions of the state, it's actually a specific term. You have to register as a lobbyist if you are paid by 2 or more people, i.e. an organization, to go up there and talk on their behalf. So it's actually a really specific term, and I've heard real confusion around this in committee rooms.
And I
And
think I just made it worse.
no, I mean, so then there's all this whole crowd of people that go up there, a lot of registered lobbyists, they know to hang out on the 3rd floor and kind of walk around. And then a lot of other people too, who come up there just to kind of like get across who they are more generally speaking and what their priorities are. And one of the transparency measures is really around, just a little more sunlight around the key bills that lobbyists are being paid to work on every year up there.
That would make it so much easier for
It
all of us.
would.
I want to respond to one of the questions here in the chat about how to contact legislators. Lorraine says that she sent an email to the address listed on the website and left a voicemail message on their home phone. You're doing the right thing. That's how to do it. I wouldn't expect a response necessarily because they probably get hundreds of those. But I think calling their office during the legislative session and saying something really specific, like, I want to urge the senator to vote in favor of this thing or this bill or this idea, they do tally those and they do look at them, but they get a lot of feedback. So keep doing that thing. And outside of this session, yeah, you are going to need to email and try and see if you can get them at home.
Well, that's actually we could segue there a little bit, Gwyneth, because there's an interesting item that has been inserted into the state budget that Tripp wrote about in his newsletter. They've put money in the state budget to hire legislative staff. And this would be significant enough to where we would now have a core of people employed in the state whose job is to help help lawmakers actually, probably one of their functions would be to help lawmakers respond to constituents. I mean, I think it's important to kind of reiterate that our lawmakers are volunteers, they have other jobs. You know, I mean, I've heard so many of them say it's just really important to keep up with constituent needs, all of the outreach that they need to do in their districts while also maintaining their other jobs and whatnot. So, I mean,
we should back up too, because maybe not everybody read the newsletter or know about this. Most states do provide year-round professional staff for lawmakers, and New Mexico doesn't. And so we will see how much the legislature passes in the budget for new expanded legislative staff, year-round professional staff, and whether the governor actually lets it go through with the budget or vetoes it. Frankly, we don't know. But that's the lawmakers here are there's a lawmaker survey that the Foundation for Open Government actually just put out yesterday that we need to look at about lawmakers basically saying what's needed for staff, why they need staff. Can we handle this one last question in the queue right now? Which is
about to do it.
Go ahead.
Well, I used to work for the Foundation for Open Government, and even I can't remember if this little detail is something that would require amending the Open Meetings Act. Probably.
What's the question, Gwyneth? You might want to say what the question is.
So this is, how can we get a statewide requirement that all elective bodies provide online access with recordings? It's a great idea. A lot of them are doing it. I think the city of Albuquerque, I have to give them, through several administrations, there was a lot of great work. I have to give props to Barry's administration because they did a lot of transparency work during that administration, and they've continued it now. And they do a pretty good job of putting those agendas up, putting the packet up, making the webcasts easy to find and watch and archived and all of that. But that's Albuquerque. And so, Bill, who asked this question, is talking about McKinley County. I think one of the reasons they haven't, made this a statewide requirement is that you do hear these things from the smaller counties, like they don't have the resources to do it, And McKinley's not that small, but Union, Colfax, you get out there and they're like, are you kidding? All 12 people in the county come to the meeting,
Yeah, no, thank you for handling that question. It's a really important question that, that people have out there. I want to return real quick. I know we want to get to a subject matter like bills and stuff, but I want to say too around the lobbyists and the state house, that it does take one. I mean, like even people who are paid to be up there, like journalists, it takes people years and years and years to learn who is who and who they're basically, who they're representing. You can always look at the lobbyist index on the Secretary of State's office. That's a great resource. But it takes a lot of time. And, one of the things that we used to talk about a lot at New Mexico in depth in our early years was, well, I say we talked about it, we wrote about it a couple of times. It would be great if the state actually, as a rule at the Roundhouse, had lobbyists kind of have name tags.
I would love that. My students would love that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, it wouldn't help. Like now, it wouldn't help me necessarily, but I've been there a long time. For people who have not, for people coming up who have no idea, it's very important.
They change clients all the time.
Exactly. It's like and actually there are states that actually require them to list their clients too on the name tag. And so I think that that's something that, people should talk about, frankly, because not everybody has the chance to go up every session to learn who's who.
Yeah, and for regular people, it's maybe not that important because if a lobbyist does stand up in committee and say something in public, they do announce who they are. Yeah. But then you're not, there is not as much transparency. So for example, if you are trying to figure out, well, who's working for and against this, oil and gas bill? Well, who the hell knows? We
That's
don't
right.
know, right? So
That's right.
if it, like, from our perspective, oh, I want to get some comment pro and con, maybe I can talk to some of these people. If you're brand new and your phone isn't full of contacts already, you have no idea where to start. And you can imagine that the public gets even less because we know less, and that's harder to find out. And the Capitol Press Corps is 98% newcomers now.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. And look, doing a great job because they are new. It's a very hard beat. It's a very difficult place to understand. I want to throw out props to all the new folks who are figuring this stuff out, but it's very
Especially
difficult.
Megan Gleason at the Albuquerque Journal, who was one of our New Mexico local news fellows.
Yeah.
I have to push my fellows.
Yes.
She was an editor of the Daily Lobo, and then she worked at Source, New Mexico for her fellowship and after that, and just went over to the Journal. It's her first session up at the Capitol, and she's got the budget story on the front page.
And she wrote the budget story, which actually, to be honest with you, also had the New Mexican also had a new reporter writing about the budget yesterday.
Pretty good.
And both of them, I thought, did commendable jobs. That's a tough thing to parse. So I really, but it does speak to the the amount of institution.
To know this about the press, and lawmakers too. I mean, if we have any lawmakers who are listening or watching this later, that, the press corps is there, there's a lot of newcomers up there. So, I mean, it's a tough beat, so, I mean, I think it's important for people to know that. I think we should get back, just in the interest of time, to this. So legislative staff is part of a larger umbrella that is.
And can I just speak to that super briefly? And we can knock off a bunch of the things on our list here, but I talked to some Republicans over the past 2 weeks who are concerned about legislative salaries because, what one of them said to me was, this is just, giving them some money to set up little field campaign offices, right? Well, of course, there are measures in state government to prevent government employees from doing political work on state time or with state resources. And I asked Representative Nathan Small, about this as he was leading the press conference yesterday about the budget. I said, what reassurance can you give people that adding this staff is going to go to legislative work and not political work? And he said, well, they're going to be a part of the legislative council service. And that is a really professional, nonpartisan outfit. And we all know that. I think they are quite well respected. So that's a good argument.
That's a great point to point out, which is, the legislative council service, for those folks who may not know in here, they draft all the bills. They're very professional. They are, that's right. They do the work of the legislature. They're not like doing campaign stuff. Not at all.
I think, this paying for staff is it's under this umbrella called modernization of the legislature, and other proposals are to pay lawmakers a salary. So it's to give them staff, it's to pay them a salary. And there's also this other proposal that to lengthen the session, or to change the length of the sessions, which I think sometimes people don't quite get that one. But it's, interestingly enough, when I was looking at the bills, these are all this year, they're all resolutions, because I think the state constitution has to be changed on some of this stuff. Is that right? So
Yes.
There's an idea to create a salary commission, and it's come up numerous times over the years. It's passed its first House committee, but this commission would actually set salaries for lawmakers. And I think there seems to be, a little bit more agreement on that one. But I was really struck when I was looking at, lengthening the salary, the idea of lengthening
session.
sessions. How many resolutions have been filed by different lawmakers, and it's very bipartisan. So, I mean, it's interesting to see
but there are some real differences there. So, for example, Republicans have proposed 2 45-day sessions, right? And they did this last year, I think. This is like, it doesn't really change anything if you take a 60-day and a 30-day and you make it 2 45s. I don't think the Democrats are going to go for that. If they go for anything, I think they'd go for 260s. Senator Peter Worth told me last week that he thinks it has to be a full package of the salaries for lawmakers, staff at longer sessions too. And I think in the salary nugget that they slipped into the budget, the commission is included in that too. So we'll see if that survives the Senate.
I want to throw in a little bit of context for those people watching us or who will hear or watch this later. We just need to remind folks that New Mexico is the only state that doesn't pay their lawmakers a salary. And this is a little fuzzy matter because New Hampshire pays a salary is only $100, though we get that. But if you do look at the range of salaries out there, New Mexico is yeah.
It's very difficult to compare because the National Conference of State Legislatures has a webpage where they list all the salaries, but they're apples and oranges. Some of them are X number of dollars a year. Some are X number of dollars per day in session. And then others are dollars per day of work total plus per diem. And some are just per diem plus this or per session. So definitely everywhere else they get more money. I mean, the per diem isn't bad, but all three of us have tried to rent places during this session, right? And we know how much it costs to stay up there, to eat up there.
Yeah, and I would add to about the salary discussion. And look, it's a very robust discussion, and you're right. If you really look into the weeds, I mean, you really go into the details of how states pay their legislators, there are differences. I think that there's a point that some people make, which is if you do pay salaries, you might get a more diverse legislature.
It would allow more people to run. And this is an argument you hear, in particular, women lawmakers making at the State House. Is like, I mean, it's hard to be a lawmaker in the state if you're not retired or if you're not kind of wealthy or have a lot of resources because you're not paid, and it's a full-time job. And I think taking a step back, I mean, it's something for all of New Mexicans to consider, really. I mean, this is at this point in our, in the state's history, is a professional legislature more needed? I mean, arguably lobbyists have a lot of power up there because they bring all of this subject matter expertise. So maybe if lawmakers had more time on their hands and they actually had their own policy analysts, maybe it would lessen their reliance on lobbyists. It's kind of like an interesting argument that plays out up there.
That's an excellent point, right? So if we're talking about the balance of power up there, lobbyists, a lot of them former lawmakers, a lot of them very well paid, have so much power in the building because they are the ones who have this institutional knowledge. And again, it isn't necessarily evil. I was talking to Camilla Feibelman with the Sierra Club the other day, and I was just introducing her to a student. And I said, Camilla, you've been around for a while. How long? And she said 23 years with the Sierra Club. And so, if I'm a brand new lawmaker and Camilla walks into my office and I say, well, do you remember what we've done on this subject? She's going to give me so much information than the secretary who I've hired for 30 days to sit in my office. I mean, who else am I supposed to turn to? So I think it's very tempting to rely more on lobbyists than they would if they had more analysts out. And, the committees have some staff and some of the legislative bigwigs do, but for average people, I think it would probably make their work better.
Yes, I think so. And to the point of what I'm about to say applies to everything, which is the lengthening of the session and, having more staff and whatnot. I mean, it's extraordinary. The complexity of some of the bills that lawmakers have to actually debate and understand that come through the legislature. I mean, they're really complex and really large and thorny, deep questions about how to resolve challenges.
You know, I see, Marjorie, that you wanted to talk about a prohibition on lawmakers drinking before or during committee debates.
No, I just, I noticed that one and I thought it would be worth, bringing up, but what we really need to, talk about is the Governmental Conduct Act, but
Yeah.
let's just for a minute talk about, but yeah, for a minute, let's talk about alcohol.
And I think it's an issue. There's a lot of lobbyists up there, really energized on the alcohol tax issue,
Mhm.
for sure. And I think the partying is a little bit of an issue, but I think it's actually slightly less. And not just because Rio Chama's not open for lunch anymore.
It's not, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's not, and the Pink Adobe's not, and so you have to kind of walk a ways to
Mhm.
get a cocktail during lunch now.
I think this issue came up during a controversy, a lingering controversy over a sexual harassment charge that was up at the Roundhouse a few years back.
Well, a bottle of bourbon in your desk drawer is a
Yeah.
different story.
Yeah, so it's about people maybe being in their offices drinking and then I think what that brought forward was beyond that particular allegation was certain lawmakers saying, look, this is normal up here. There's people who come onto the floor after drinking and they debate bills. And that's just shouldn't be happening. So I think that's what it would be a rule that got passed in the Senate, I think, is where it's at.
We've all seen it.
But you know, I mean, I think it's interesting to see that it's come back this year, that it's not something that was just kind of fly by night and now they've dropped it. But it would be an internal rule of the legislature.
Yes, that's right.
Before we get off modernization, though, I want to say that I did ask Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham about this in my interview with her yesterday. It's going to air Friday night at 7 on New Mexico in Focus. And she had a really interesting response. I put to her what Worth had told me about what he thinks is required about in terms of staffing and salary and stuff like that, and session length. And she talked quite a bit about the culture of Santa Fe and the legislature and the feel of it and how that would change if the legislature were more professionalized. And I think a lot more professionalized than maybe these steps are talking about. But let me just say, tune into that for an interesting take
Okay,
on
no, for sure. I
Yeah,
mean, it
definitely.
occurred to me, this, I think that, despite some of the challenges that some people have reaching their lawmakers, I have been struck in New Mexico about how easy it is to talk to lawmakers, not just at the Roundhouse, but like out in your community. I mean, I see them out and about and they're volunteers and by the nature of that, they're actually activists first, then they run for the state house. And I think it's interesting to consider how that might change if,
That's a great point.
yeah,
Yes.
being a lawmaker becomes someone's full-time job. We know how,
But we're not talking about full-time jobs. I mean, I think people value that we have people in the Roundhouse who do real work, at some other point. I mean, I think it's cool that we have doctors and lawyers and nurses and teachers and people who work in oil and gas and people who work in environmental fields and people who own bars and
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think if they create this salary commission, we'll see what its mandate is and the degree to which it could function as a full-time job for some people,
Yeah. Or, I think I always feel bad for the parents during this session because it is for those of us who are covering it part-time, it becomes a real hassle. Not being able to get home for dinner, and a lot of them who live far away end up staying in Santa Fe. So the salary could make it possible for some younger people to serve, which I think would be great. Not to be ageist, we need a diversity.
No, right.
There's a lot of retirees up there because they have the time, you know what I mean? So
Right.
Yes.
it would broaden the availability to people who are at a different life stage.
Right. So do you guys want to, just in the interest of time, talk a little bit about this Governmental Conduct Act?
Sure, passed out of the House yesterday. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and so it's a bill, it got a message from the governor, which is why it can be considered this session. So I mean, it tells you that it has her, kind of in some ways endorsement. She's by message, I mean, this is a 30-day session. Only budget related matters can be discussed or bills with an appropriation unless the governor greenlights a bill to lawmakers. So she sends down a message saying they can take it up. And so this would be the second year that this bill has been brought forward for the second year in a row. It's now passed the House, and it's a response to a Supreme Court decision that, in the words of Jeremy Ferris, the executive director of the State Ethics Commission, gutted the state's main anti-corruption statute, which is the Governmental Conduct Act, which is the act that it's the act that seeks to put guardrails around actions of lawmakers to make sure they're acting in the public interest. And so it didn't strike down every provision in the Governmental Conduct Act, and principally what the decision did was eliminated the ability of the Attorney General to bring criminal charges against public officials on things like using their public office or public resources for politicking, to actually be doing partisan activity. And then the other big area was quid pro quo or conflicts of interest. It eliminated the ability to bring criminal ethics charges around things like doing something for somebody or not doing something for somebody in exchange for money or something of value, or having a conflict of interest that is monetarily valuable to, where the lawmaker actually, takes actions up there because it would benefit them. And the Supreme Court found that the way it was currently written, our statute was currently written, was too vague to bring criminal charges. So they've written a new version where they've taken the bill, they've modified it, and they've tried to make it much more specific. And that's what.
And I just want to make sure that the viewers here and afterwards understand, like, bribery, they can still prosecute bribery. That doesn't wipe it away, the Supreme Court ruling. It's just these things that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, there's other statutes that you can,
Yes.
that you can bring charges under.
Criminal prosecution kind of stuff. Yes. Right.
But in terms of the state's ability to bring a criminal charge for an ethics violation, which is what we're aiming for. And another thing Ferris said was, they're still bringing civil actions under the Governmental Conduct Act for these sorts of things. But he said, but it puts us on shaky ground. Civil actions.
What was the vote yesterday, Marjorie?
It was unanimous coming out of the
unanimous.
House.
That kind of signals that this is going to,
Well, I mean, so last year it came out of the House also pretty quickly, and we've got 2 weeks left in the session, and you just really never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. We don't know what the signals.
Yeah, and there has to be like a willingness, I think, on the part of lawmakers to get it scheduled quickly in committees and get it on the calendar, so it will pass out.
A tip for our viewers now and later is on this, like in this particular case with the Senate, if this particular bill gets 3 committees, that's not a good sign. If it gets 1 committee or 2, that's maybe a better sign, because you've you have limited time. So that's how we as journalists kind of like handicap the potential success of bills, which is how many committees each chamber assigns a bill. I just wanted to throw that out there so folks know to do that themselves.
I tend to think this one is not super controversial because it's not.
I agree.
I remember when back in 09-ish, when a U.S. appellate court found that the state's Campaign Reporting Act was unconstitutional.
Right.
And that had to do with how what was allowable under the law in terms of communicating to the public through mailers and campaign, just campaign stuff, or versus what needed to be reported, And because that was more directly political, that might be why it took like a decade for the legislature to actually reform that law. I mean, so basically the state had an unenforceable campaign reporting act for, a decade. And
So that's in contrast to what you think will happen here.
yeah,
basically,
I
is
mean,
what
with
you're
this
saying.
one, but it brings
Yeah.
that up for me. I wonder, are they going to drag this out for as long as they did that one? In terms of reforming a law that a court found was not enforceable. And, Ferris said to us in December in an event we held with him that he said, when the court invalidates a statute that the legislature, statutes come from the legislature must act. It's because somehow what they had put into statute didn't pass muster in front of a court. His point was the legislature then needs to act, but we've seen that they don't always do that.
And I think in this situation and situations similar to this one, it invites a lot of news coverage when they don't act.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is
so we're watching with interest what happens here.
Yeah. Are there other subjects we'd like to handle? I think we had other things that we weren't,
Pocket veto.
Yes. Extraordinary.
Yeah, that one's good.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It is a transparency issue, right?
Yes.
At the end of the session, the governor has a statutory date by which she has to sign or veto things. But she can also just ignore them, and that's called a pocket veto. So she didn't actively veto them, but by inaction, lets them die. And I talked to Representative Jason Harper about this because he's a co-sponsor of that. And I want to make a correction. He's not making it into the show that will air tomorrow night, but my interview will be up on YouTube. So look for it on social media. And I'll link to it too. We had a really good talk, and we just ran late with the governor. So we had to bump him to YouTube, which sucks because he's a great interview.
He is really detail oriented. I mean, he really he mastered these details.
Yeah,
I
and
think,
his
right?
argument is, when she vetoes something, she writes a message saying why she did it, and people deserve to know why she's letting things die. And Harper said, "I've been a victim of this myself, and I want to know."
I mean,
a lot of people
Yeah.
are victims of it because pocket vetoes are fairly common. And
every governor does it. It's
every
not
governor
just
does
this
it.
one.
And
That's right.
And interestingly enough, the other thing, which is, I think lawmakers are the issue of the vetoes has become a thing. So like in these resolutions to lengthen sessions, in just about every one, I think, a lot of them at least, also included is the ability to override a veto from the previous year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so that is included in all of those resolutions to lengthen the session. So some issues around veto.
Can I ask you both?
Well, let me just explain what Marjorie said. And the reason for that is if you're coming into a 30-day and you had something vetoed in the long session, then you need a message. The governor needs to approve it to be heard in the 30 days. So you kick it out 2 years, right? Is the problem. So, something that is part of a normal long legislative session could be picked up quite quickly in a in a 30-day and dealt with without the governor's permission.
Can I ask both of you this question? And now we're being legislative nerds, process nerds. Where is the pocket veto legislation in the legislature right now? And what I think it's one, is it past one committee?
This past one House committee. A lot of these resolutions.
What was the vote?
One House committee. Here, let me look.
No, yeah, I mean, I wonder if it was unanimous or if it was party line or a mixture, because I think a lot of people.
It was unanimous of.
Yep, that's what I suspected.
But a lot of these resolutions, they've only passed one House committee, and I just think with 2 weeks left in the session,
you don't.
It's going to be an uphill climb for them.
It's a very interesting, important debate to have. the pocket veto stuff.
We
And
have
actually
a
what you,
question
yeah,
here too about legislature
yeah.
pay. And Florence brings up the issue of retirement benefits. The retirement benefits are actually pretty sweet, and you only have to serve a relatively small number of years in order to get them. So Florence asks, you know, when we're talking about their pay, will that be addressed in the payment plan? I have heard that as part of these discussions, and I think they are separate issues, because the retirement is quite favorable. As someone who's a member of the educational retirement board right now, as a teacher at UNM, I know that the the legislative retirement is pretty dang good, but that doesn't help people serve now, right? It's kind of a reward for later. And so I think there may be conversation
I think so.
about the total package. Are lawmakers going to vote to take their retirement benefits away? That seems like a tall order.
I will say too that for para, well, you're at ERB, which is for K-12, higher ed, stuff like that. Para is for government, state government, local government, municipality, county, and stuff like this. You have to serve. There's this formula, but it's
I
usually
think we
20
vested
years or
5 years at UNM.
that's not full pension. That's just
Yeah.
when you vest.
I mean, it's
And
a
so
I don't know what it is, but there's a certain
I think,
number you have to
I think
serve.
it's 5 years.
well, you do vested 5 years, but you have to work so many years to get full pension, is what I'm saying.
At the legislature, yeah, but it's not very long.
No. What I'm saying is, at the legislature, I think to get the full pension, you have to be a lawmaker for many fewer years than you do at
Yes,
para or ERB. That's
right.
what I'm
I
saying.
should run for office.
So, I mean, I think that's going to be a discussion, honestly.
Yeah.
Is how many years?
I would imagine that if they form this commission, I would imagine they would bring into account.
I think that would be
full
a
package.
very important part of that.
Yeah, I think it's a yes for those of us who.
I mean, I'm not going to
are.
weigh in on retirement benefits.
Yeah,
per
me
se.
either. But I mean,
I
it's
generally think that retirement benefits are good. And I
right.
will say, when I watch those lawmakers up there, 1 year of that would wear me out. I mean, to me, it's like it is a full.
It's tough work. No, yeah,
it's a lot of work. I mean, it's a little mind blowing, actually.
I mean, I hope hopefully people will understand that we as journalists are not always like, oh, we're writing negative stories. I think we're all kind of nodding our head saying this is tough work.
Mhm.
And that there are really monumental issues they're taking on every session, frankly.
Right. But then
so
through the year too, it's beyond the session. It's all the interim committees.
yes, exactly.
And during the year, it's actually a around the year kind of work. Gosh, there is so much to talk about when it comes to, I mean, we just kind of skimmed the surface and we're already like at 122. I mean, this area around transparency, how to ensure the public trust is kind of intact, or that people are like, treating public goods the way they should. I mean, it's all very consequential stuff. We try to follow it at New Mexico in depth as much as we can. I'd like to ask folks any other questions or comments people have. And also, Gwyneth, I wanted to ask you, since we have you here, are there other issues that you're following up there in particular, or anything else that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, next week the tax package will probably appear. And so we'll be looking at that for sure. There's a lot of action on oil and gas moving along. Yesterday, the kind of cleanup omnibus bill moved forward from committee. And we're going to be looking at that. I think, I had one of those off the record conversations with an oil and gas lobbyist upstairs yesterday that kind of helped me understand some of the issues they had with that bill. The industry is concerned about the setbacks I've heard a lot of people talking about the idea of making sure that we talked about this on Let's Talk New Mexico when I was on last week or 2 weeks ago. A caller wanted to talk um, about not having oil and gas production within X, feet or miles or yards or whatever from a school or things like that. And the industry is, they produce a map that shows this is huge swaths of the state and that it's impractical. And then the other side says, yeah, but we have evidence showing that these emissions are really harmful. And I mean, we're a little bit stuck between those two positions where, this is the economic engine of the state. And yeah, we know it's bad for it, but we can't quite quit it. And so that kind of transition is super difficult.
Yeah, I want to say this because we published a story on this. There's that the setback stuff was taken out of the House legislation. But this is where, like, an oil and gas lobbyist, I've not talked to them about this, but this is what they would call it, playing defense. They're making sure that provision doesn't make it back into the bill or into a dummy bill, which we all know about, which is like these public welfare bills that are hiding out until the second 2 weeks of a 30-day, the last week, where somebody like puts in a provision and then, or whatever, playing defense, while the environmentalists are going to play offense. They're going to try to put that stuff into a bill.
And let me take this a next opportunity to plug New Mexico in Focus Friday night at 7, because rebuttable presumption is one of those things that, for pretrial detention, keeping folks in jail, before they have been tried and making the defendants prove that they are, safe to be released before trial. This is mostly dead in the Princess Bride category of legislation.
Thank you for that reference, as our Princess Bride fan. Yes.
I asked the governor about this, and she seemed to think that she might be able to bring some element of it back. So stay tuned for what she says about the rebuttable
interesting.
presumption.
That's, you're hearing it here, guys. That's very interesting. Yeah,
I just want to I want to just back up a little bit to the oil and gas stuff and just say, I think what we're talking about with these setbacks are so there's setbacks from the rivers and waters. That's an environmental impacts around water, and then there's the setbacks from people.
Yeah. Buildings, stuff like that.
Yeah. And if you drive around in the northwest part of the state, like through some of these rural communities, largely Navajo communities, like Counselor and Agizi and those areas, there are pipelines running along the roads, crossing driveways. There's heavy industrial trucks driving on those roads, kicking up dust. There's been explosions. There's been oil leaks and oil and gas leaks. There's, that have really kind of been right. I mean, there's people and children, and what I often don't hear, and this is just something I would like to hear more, is so we hear from the environmentalist side or the community side about how harmful this is to health, public health. I would like to hear from oil and gas, and I've tried to tease this out, but I rarely hear a good explanation for why those human impacts should be trumped by the need to pull out the oil and gas so there's more revenue for the state or whatnot.
Also local jobs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would like to hear more about how, like, what kind of safeguards or new things that they were proposing to handle really. I mean, I've driven around up in there, and we actually used an older photograph I took in our story from driving around and seeing some of that infrastructure, that oil and gas infrastructure that is just permeates some of these communities. So I just want to say, I mean, I don't think that the question is always answered all that well.
I think it's a complicated issue, frankly. I think we're almost at time, guys. It's almost 1:30. which, you know, with us, we knew it was going to be with Gwyneth. We knew it was going to be like, it's going to feel like 15 minutes, like old home week. Hey, Gwyneth, how's it going?
Yeah, we
You
could
know,
go,
that kind
we
of
could
thing.
go a while longer. If anyone else has anything to say, I also want to give a shout out to Bettina Baca, who is helping us with these webinars. You don't see her, she's behind the curtain. But she's giving us a warning now saying, you guys only have 2 minutes. Thank you, Bettina, for all of your
Yeah,
help.
thank you, Bettina.
Thank
Yes.
you.
And okay, and so Gwyneth, thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's
My
always
pleasure. It is. And I want to say thank you, especially to Trip, who has been such a help to my students this semester. Gave them a great tour around the Roundhouse and really kind of made them feel like they were not completely lost in the building, and has palled around with them a bit since then.
Yeah, they're
So
wonderful. They're great.
thank you for that help, Trip. And
Yeah, of
Marjorie,
course.
as usual, thank you for
Yeah.
everything.
At Trips, tours of the Roundhouse are unparalleled for anyone who ever wants to get
You should sell those. That should be a fundraiser. for
okay, there's a
Mexico in depth.
revenue point right there for New Mexico in depth.
Can I get $100? $100 in here in the chat right now. $100. Going, 100.
I mean, you know, they got to meet certain people, and you know, you just walk around, as you know, Gwyneth and Marjorie, you walk around and you see somebody from 2008, you know, you knew, and they're a lobbyist now, or they're a former lawmaker, or they're a mayor who used to be up. Yeah, it's fun being up there, actually.
I saw
It was my
Marty
pleasure.
Chavez yesterday, an advisor to the governor.
Oh, wow.
Marty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Richard Romero. And I actually saw Bill King. That's Gary King's
Yeah.
brother.
Right.
And
He's right.
yeah,
Right.
one of the governors.
I see him up there a lot this session.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a lot
Well,
of they're lurking up there.
yes, they are. A lot of lurkers, including journalists, who are hanging out in the hallways, kind of, you know. All right.
All
Thank you,
right,
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.